Chapter 125, 7th Year, Christmas Part 2. The ground shook, and Remus squeezed his eyes shut, belly down on the cobblestones. Everything after that moment, seeing Lily and James's head turn, before the building in front of them exploded. Everything after that made so little sense. It was all too slow, or too fast, and Remus found he did not react in his usual way. He was weak, frightened, his comprehension muddled. He felt stunned. They raised their heads, he and Sirius, much too long after it had gone quiet, when people around them were already standing up and were shouting or crying. Someone was definitely crying, a woman. That seemed the loudest of all. And someone laughing too, a thin razor-sharp crackle in the distance. Pure joy. Diagon Alley looked like a bomb site. The shops which had been destroyed were like broken teeth in a gaping jaw, or strange blue patches of sky where something else should be. It was hard to see much on ground level, but they squinted through the settling dust further down the street towards Gringotts, where most of the noise seemed to be coming from. "You too!" a woman hissed, coming towards them from behind, picking through the rubble, her wand raised. "Get back! Behind me!" She stalked ahead. Her robes were deep maroon, an Aura's uniform. "James!" Sirius choked, his voice strange and strangled with terror. He scrambled to his feet, his robes all dusty and his hair full of soot. He half ran, half stumbled towards the hole in the sky where the Quidditch supply shop had been stood, minutes before. "Sirius! No!" Remus coughed weakly, following him, feeling stupid and heavy. "James!" Sirius was shouting, but so many people were shouting. "Sirius!" Remus coughed again, trying hard to keep up, but he'd bruised his hip when he'd hit the ground, and his ears were still ringing, and his eyes were starting to go blurry as he wiped away tears with dusty wrists. "Sirius!" "Mad blood's out!" Remus dropped to his knees, covering his ears, and was not the only one. The voice seemed to be right behind him, inside his head. It was everywhere. The crowd was silent, finally, as everyone stared around blinking, looking for the owner of the horrible, insidious voice. Whatever was going on, it was happening further away. Remus could smell the magic now, and see beams of light firing through dust clouds surrounding Gringotts. He could smell Moody and Ferox, maybe him, and the Death Eaters. Some of them he recognised, others he didn't, but they were there, and there were a lot of them. Where was Sirius? The ruins of the shop, which had stood before them, was still bleeding smoke, and Sirius had wandered straight into it, the idiot. Gritting his teeth, with not a little pain, Remus pushed himself to his feet again. He had to find them. The shouts of battle were getting louder, more desperate. The woman who had ordered him and Sirius back had joined in, and Remus's conscience told him he ought to go and help. But James and Lily and Sirius... "Mors Morda!" The same voice spoke, close and far away. The smoke filling the street seemed to wither and darken, expanding and swirling upwards to form an enormous snake intertwined with a screaming, hollow-eyed black skull. "It's him!" a man near Remus shouted. "It's you-know-who!" "Silencio!" Someone else hexed him into the quietness. An odd stillness. More flashes. Blue, green, yellow, red, and then... crack, crack, crack. They were getting away. For the first time, Remus thought he ought to withdraw his wand, fumbling about in his borrowed robes for it. As he did, his fingers brushed against something else, smooth and heavy. His fingers closed around his pocket watch, and he wrenched it out, prizing it open quickly, saying out loud, "Sirius Black!" The needle did not even wobble, but pointed forward immediately, and Remus followed it towards the ruin of the shop. "Sirius! Sirius! Moony!" A hand grabbed his shoulder, and he whipped around desperately. "James!" James hugged him fiercely, and Remus didn't even think about how unusual it was. He was just so grateful and relieved. He hugged him back. Lily appeared at his shoulder, pale-faced, her hair falling out of its ponytail, clothes smudged with ash. There was a cut just under her hairline, dark blood oozing down her left eyebrow. And Sirius too. Thank God, thank God, thank God. I lost you, Remus said hoarsely, once James let him go. One of the lenses in his glasses was shattered. I'm sorry, Sirius said, sounding just as awful. We'd better go and help, James said, shaking both their shoulders. The battle's finished, Remus said. They ran away. Disapparated, most of them. How did you two? He stared at Lily and James, still not quite believing his eyes. Frank, Lily said, sounding much smaller than Remus had ever heard her. James wrapped an arm around her. Frank's an aura. He used a knockback jink on us, right before the shop was hit. Then Protego. I think... I didn't know what to do. Her eyes filled with tears, and James wrapped his other arm around her, enveloping her completely. I didn't either, Remus said, as if it would help. Didn't even get my wand out. Sirius was gripping his, though. He looked dreadful, fierce as a demon, eyes full of hatred. I'm going anyway. They might still need help, he said. Remus grabbed him by the shoulders, surprising himself with his strength. Don't you dare, he growled, meeting Sirius's eye. Something distinctly canine passed between them, and Remus thought that they were going to actually fight. And that would have been sort of a relief, but of course James intervened. Mooney's right, he said. We ought to crack. Boys! Dad! Fleemont Potter had arrived next to James. He grabbed his son, then Sirius, then Remus, who had recovered enough now to find all the hugging a bit much, then stared with horror at what remained of Diagon Alley. His bushy eyebrows knit, and he addressed his son. Are you all okay? Your mother wants you back at the house immediately. She's been called to St. Mungo's, otherwise she'd be here. Shouldn't we stay and help? James asked, looking troubled, still holding Lily tightly to his chest. What a bloody hero, Remus thought. He still had Sirius by the shoulders, gripping him hard because he couldn't hug him. Fleemont looked at James and seemed to grow a few inches with pride. He smiled. No, son, it's all in hand. Moody's there, and Dumbledore's on his way. I just want you all home and safe before anything... No one is to leave! A man was shouting, cutting through the crowd and the rubble with an authoritative stride. Not until they've been questioned by... Oh, hello, Monty. Didn't know you were here. Amos? Mr. Potter nodded at the ministry official. Got here as soon as I could. Taking the boys home. They were out shopping and got caught up. That's so. The official, Amos, came over to look at them all. Names? Amos, is that really necessary? Names, he repeated in a harder tone. Well, you know James. You've known him since he was 5, for goodness sake, Fleemont tutted. And this is Miss Evans, I presume. He glanced at Lily, who had stopped crying but still looked very frightened. Yes, she squeaked. Lily Evans. Evans. Amos looked thoughtful. He pulled some parchment out of his pocket. Evans... Parents' name? You wouldn't know them, she said, her eyes darting between James and the official. I'm Muggleborn. Amos looked down his nose at her again, then eyed James with a rude quirk of his eyebrow. I see, very well. And you two... Oh, I know you. You're the Black Heir. Was, Sirius muttered. He shook himself free of Remus and shoved his hands in his pockets, adopting a sullen, irritable attitude, which always appeared when his family was mentioned. Remus wished he could tell him not to do that. It didn't make him look any less guilty. He's coming with us too, Fleemont said quickly. Sirius has lived with us for well over a year now. And, come on, Monty, Amos tutted. The Black Heir? I'm not stupid, and neither are you. He'll have to be questioned. Absolutely not, Fleemont raised his voice. Remus had never heard him shout before. It was even more terrifying than the dark mark. "They're school kids, for Godric's sake!" "Plenty of school kids on their side too, from what I hear," Amos said. "Plenty of blacks too." "I'm not interested in that. But you can speak with Dumbledore if you have to. I am responsible for these boys, and I am taking them all home right away." "What about you?" Amos suddenly turned on Remus, who blinked. Sometimes he forgot that the Potters included him in their responsibilities. "Remus," he said, trying to be brave, but failing miserably. "What if this man knows something? What if he knows that I'm a werewolf?" "Lupin." Amos made a note, but asked no further questions. "You're all to wait here while I speak with Dumbledore," he said pompously. "Like hell we will," Fleemont snorted. "If you want to go and interrupt Albus Dumbledore while he assists in the investigation of a terrorist attack for the sake of a few frightened teenagers, then—" "Amos!" Someone, was it really Frank, shouted from the distance. "Where the hell are you? We need you up here. It's Leo." The official turned sharply, and with a reluctant final glance at Sirius, he ran towards the voice. Mr. Potter leapt into action, taking no chances. "Quick, boys! Are you all okay to apparate? Miss Evans, probably best you come with us for now." Lily nodded, and James kissed her, before they both disapparated together, hand in hand. Fleemont nodded at Sirius and Remus, before vanishing with a loud crack himself. Remus looked at Sirius. Sirius looked at him too, still angry, still full of hot desire for revenge. "Oh no," Remus said firmly, then, barely even thinking about it, grabbed Sirius's elbow hard and prepared to apparate with him. Sirius fought it, mid-turn. The stupid fool could have easily splinched them both, as he strained against Remus's spell, wanting only to stay where the fight was. But Remus was stronger, and the air was full of fizzing, roaring leftover magic, and Remus drank from it, overpowering Sirius with the sheer weight of his own determination. They arrived on the Potter's front porch with such force their heads banged together, and they wretched apart, panting, feeling scorched. "Fucking hell, Mooney!" Sirius gasped, rubbing his elbow where Remus had grabbed him. "I had to stop you, idiot." Remus bent forward, hands on his knees. He felt completely drained, but buzzing with it, nerves alight with static. James opened the door. "Get inside," he said. "Quickly." Sirius pushed past Remus without even looking at him. Lily stayed for another hour or so, drinking cup after cup of tea, as Gully scuttled back and forth from the kitchen, wringing his little wizened hands and shaking his head woefully. Mr. Potter apologised profusely to Lily, and hoped they would meet again, under some better circumstances, before locking himself away in his study. After that, they sat in silence for most of the time, with only the occasional outburst from James or Sirius. "Snape!" Sirius ranted, pacing back and forth. "We saw him in the bookshop. He threatened Mooney. He must have had something to do with it." "You don't know that," Lily said, shakily, staring at a pattern on her teacup. "Did anyone see any of them, though?" "No," James shook his head. "Too busy trying to take cover." "No," Lily shook her head. "No," Remus said. Sirius looked up at him. "Mooney, you smelled something. You told me, remember? Do you know who—" "Remus can smell people." Lily looked up, half shocked, half curious. "Like a scent?" "Not like... Well, it's a wolf thing. Instinct. But I don't..." Remus wished the ground would swallow him. He could tell them, but he didn't want to break it to Sirius like this. Not while they were furious at each other, and frightened, and Lily and James were sitting right there. "Mooney," Sirius said, in a very low, dark voice that none of them had ever heard before. "Tell me, who?" Remus looked at James, desperately for help, but he was just staring back, waiting. Lily too, her mouth slightly open. He looked at Sirius again, and tried to hold his stare. think Regulus was there. But lots of people were there, Sirius. Sirius threw his hands up and left the room in utter silence. Lily gave a very tired sigh. "James," she said, "I think I'd better go home. Mum and Dad they'll worry." James insisted on apparating back with Lily, then returning by himself. Remus wished he hadn't. He didn't want to be left alone. Alone it all came flooding back into his mind, as vivid as a cinema screen. The noise, the smoke, the utter terror and shame. He had not acted. His first chance to prove to Dumbledore, and Moony, and even Snivellus, that he was on the right side and willing to fight for it. But he had never expected it to be like that. He had never considered that when the time came, and you were on a battlefield with the only people you love in the world, all he'd wanted to do was find them and run away. When James returned, he found Remus pacing, treading at the same stretch of carpet Sirius had been earlier. "Are you okay, Moony?" he asked, nervously, taking slow steps forward, arms up, as if Remus was an untamed beast. "I didn't do anything," Remus muttered, still pacing. I couldn't move. I couldn't think." "Remus," James kept speaking in that steady, friendly tone. It was more soothing than Remus wanted to admit. "Nobody could. It was horrible. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened." Remus stopped dead and stared at James. He gave a half smile and shrugged. "None of us knew what to do." "Sirius did," Remus challenged. "He was the one who got up. He wanted to help." "Sirius never thinks, though, Moony. You know that." "Oi, up yours, Potter!" Sirius appeared in the doorway, arms folded. His eyes were a bit pink, but he didn't look angry anymore. Remus smiled at him, hopefully, behind James's back. Sirius smiled back reassuringly. "I was going to say," James laughed, that's what makes you so brave, you wanker. You just want to rush in and help, even if it's the worst idea in the world." "Yes, okay, it was not a good idea," Sirius said, sitting down on the sofa beside James. "At least you did something," Remus said. "At least you got up." "You got up too, Remus," Sirius said softly. "After you did," Remus shot back. "I was pathetic. How are we ever going to win this war if it's going to be like that? If I'm too scared to..." "I was scared too," Sirius said, looking up. "I'm not that bonkers. I was still bricking it. I mean, fucking hell." "Don't," James said, running his hand through his hair, still gritty with rubble. "It took me so long to even figure out what happened, and all I could think about was getting Lily somewhere safe. I thought I would just do anything to make sure she was safe." "There you are then," Sirius said firmly. "That's how we win it." Mrs. Potter did not come back from St. Mungo's all night, but Fleemont stepped out of his office to tell the boys that he had spoken to her and that she was all right, before asking Gully to make him a sandwich and closing the door again. Peter came over, white and shaking. He had heard in the news, apparently. He had a cousin working for the Daily Prophet. There was no useful information, though. No death count yet. It hadn't been finalised. Peter stayed for supper, but James was the only one really able to keep up a proper conversation, and eventually Peter left. When Remus announced he wanted an early night, the other two shrugged and agreed to go up too. After showering and washing the dust and smoke out of his hair, he brushed his teeth in the cold, quiet bathroom and tried not to think about how odd it felt to be doing such normal things on such an abnormal day. He could hear Sirius and James murmuring quietly in the next room, solemn, tense tones. He decided to leave them to it. Hours later, Remus was seriously regretting that decision. He couldn't sleep. He waited and waited for Sirius to come, until he realised that he must still be in with James, and might not come at all. Remus lay on his back and tried to keep his thoughts from getting too loud. "This is war," he kept thinking. "This is what you agreed to do. You promised Dumbledore. You promised your friends." Finally, in the small hours when he was sick from tiredness and the first pink rays of sunshine were peeking around the curtains, his door opened. Sirius crept across the room with the stealth of a cat. "Remus," he whispered from the foot of the bed. Remus rolled over. "I'm here." Sirius practically flew at him, sliding in under the covers and burying his head under the duvet. They clung to each other, and everything steadied itself. Remus was calm at last. In a moment, Sirius moved slightly and whispered, "Tell me a secret. A nice one." Remus paused. He kissed Sirius's hair. "I'm mental about you too." Chapter 126. 7th Year, Christmas, Part 3. Monday, the 2nd of January, 1978. The next week and a half was one of the darkest Remus could remember. When Mrs. Potter finally arrived home the day after the attack, she was white and drawn and hugged her family so tight, as if she'd thought she would never see them again. "About 50 dead, so I've heard," she said solemnly. "It was mostly triage, though. Hundreds wounded." Any of us?" Mr. Potter asked. He looked as though he hadn't slept in hours, and indeed, as far as Remus knew, he had not been to bed either. Euphemia nodded, closing her eyes. "Later," she said, casting a glance at the boys, and James looked indignant. "We can hear it," he said. "We're all of age, and we were there when it happened." "Yes, I know you were!" Mrs. Potter shouted, her voice shrill. James's mouth snapped shut, and he looked down ashamed. Mrs. Potter got up. "I'm going for a lie down." She left the room, and the men sat in silence. "Sorry, Dad," James mumbled. "It's all right." Fleement removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "We're all upset. Your mother and I need you boys to listen and do as you're told until it's time to go back to school. Do you understand?" They all nodded reluctantly, and Remus saw the muscles in Sirius's jaw tighten. It was a mark of his respect for Mr. Potter that he did not protest. "Now," Fleement continued, "this house is going to be very busy for the next few days, and you're going to see a lot of very important people doing very important work. Do not ask too many questions, and do not make nuisances of yourselves." "Can't we help?" James asked earnestly. "Yes," Fleement nodded, "by being gracious hosts and minding your mother." "Yes, Dad," James sighed, looking down again, obviously disappointed. "James," Fleament began, reaching over to touch his son's arm. Remus and Sirius took that as their cue to clear the table and waited around in the kitchen, half-heartedly helping Gully to do the washing up. "I don't see what the fuss is all about," Sirius grumbled, elbows deep in soap suds. "If they knew half of the things we were actually capable of, we can help." "We'll have our chance," Remus replied, staring out of the window as he dried the plates. The garden was very dark, and a chill mist hung in the air, making it difficult to see much beyond the patio wall. He could just make out James's Quidditch hoops on the lawn, and the dim waning moon. He didn't like not being able to see very far. It made him uneasy. "That's all right for you to say." Sirius was still complaining. "You already proved yourself." "What?" Remus glanced up at him, confused, and momentarily distracted from the window. "With that werewolf you met last year, you've already faced the enemy and shown Dumbledore he can trust you." "I don't think I explained that properly, if that's what you think," Remus said. "Olivia wasn't about the war." "Dumbledore thinks it was. Moody does. They talk about werewolves all the time. How useful you'll be trying to convince the dark creatures not to join you-know-who." "Can we talk about something else?" "Fine." They talked about nothing. They did the dishes in complete silence. Remus stared out of the window into the blackness of the Potter grounds, and looked for something. Finally, James came in, just as they finished putting away the last of the china. "All right, mate?" Sirius asked cheerily. "Yeah," James shrugged, looking somehow wiser, older. "Just dad stuff, you know?" Sirius and Remus glanced at each other, and Remus knew that they were both experiencing the same sour envy. What did it mean to have a father like Fleamont Potter? To have one at all? "I said I'd give Lily a ring, if you two fancied a walk into the village." "Why not?" Sirius said, leaving the dish rag over the tap. "Oh, Mooney, Dad said to give you this." James handed over a small scroll of paper. Remus opened it quickly, glancing over the neat name and address written there. James cocked his head, curious. "What is it?" "Oh, nothing. Booker was asking about." Remus stuffed it in his pocket. "Come on. Calls are cheaper after 6. James had finally learnt how to use the phone box unaided, so there was nothing for Remus to do but lean against the fence next to Sirius, waiting. He rolled cigarettes to pass the time. He cut the fingers off his gloves back in November for explicitly this purpose. "I didn't mean you," Sirius said quietly, "when I said dark creatures." "No, you didn't." Remus licked the Rizzler, then smoothed it down. He handed the complicated cigarette to Sirius, who took it and put it behind his ear. Remus began another one. "Got to teach me how to do that one day," Sirius murmured, watching him appreciatively. "I bet we could work out a spell to do it instantly." "Probably," Remus sighed, lining up tobacco. "But I like doing it this way." "Fair enough." They were quiet again. Remus finished his second one and held it between his thumb and forefinger, wondering whether or not to smoke it. Mrs. Potter didn't like the smell on them, and he hated to add to her troubles. But on the other hand, he could really use something to calm his nerves. Sirius could too, if the constant tapping of his leg was anything to go by. He was chewing his fingernails too. Remus lit the cigarette with a snap of his fingers and inhaled. Sirius followed suit. His leg stilled. "I am, though," Remus said on an exhale. "What?" "A dark creature, like you said." "Mooney, no." "Yep." Remus nodded, gazing out at the fields before them and the motorway behind them. "So, when you talk about wanting to prove yourself, I do understand what you mean. People trust werewolves just about as much as they trust the disgraced sons of dark wizards." "I do know. I didn't mean to act like you're the only one with a stake in this war." "Yeah, like that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "I know." Remus smiled, looking at him finally. "I'm sorry about Regulus." "Well," Sirius scuffed his feet in the gravel. "I already knew pretty much. Of course he was there." "I'm going to work so hard on this Slytherin prank when we get back to school. It'll be my best work." Sirius laughed, an honest, abandoned noise, throwing his head back. "Godric, Mooney," he grinned broadly. "When you say things like that, it makes me want to snog your face off." Remus snorted. He shot a look at James inside the red phone box, jabbering away with a huge smile on his face. "Maybe not just yet." Sirius looked mournful again. "I am going to tell him, just not with all this bad stuff going on, you know?" "I know." Remus nodded. He did. He didn't want Sirius to know it, but the idea of James finally finding out about them was much scarier than he'd prepared himself for. Why shake everyone up again? "Remus, if I ask you something, will you tell me the truth?" "Okay." His stomach clenched involuntarily, but he steeled himself. "What was the note from James's dad? It wasn't a book title, was it?" "No," Remus agreed. "It wasn't." He reached inside his pocket and pulled it out, thumbing the soft, thick parchment for a moment before handing it over to Sirius. Sirius unfolded it quickly and looked down. "Hope Jenkins," he read, a crease in his brow. "What does that mean?" "It's a name," Remus said quickly. "My mother's name and address." "Oh!" Sirius breathed, rereading it, still frowning. "Your mother." He said the word as if he'd never even considered the possibility that Remus had such a thing. "Yeah." Remus took the parchment back, shoving it back into his pocket. "I know we said we would talk about anything but mothers, but, well, Dumbledore gave me a letter she'd written back after Lyle died. She said I could try and find her when I was of age, so Mr. Potter found her, I suppose." "What are you going to do with it? Write to her?" "Yeah, I think I will." Sirius moved his hand on the fence, subtly brushing Remus's fingers. "Well, I hope you find her." Mr. Potter had been right. For the next few days, the house was busier than Remus had seen it since the Christmas party of '73. Except, of course, there was very little cheer. These were people closest to Dumbledore. Many of them were working for the ministry, but all of them were loyal to him before anything else. All of them were frontline in the war effort. Some of them were familiar faces. Moody, of course, who usually spared the time to cast a gruff nod at the 3 teenage boys who were now spending their days watching the fireplace for new arrivals. Then there was Frank Longbottom himself, just as pleasant and good-natured as Remus remembered. He came through most often with his girlfriend, Alice, the young woman who had ushered Remus and Sirius on the day of the attack. The Pruitt Twins were another surprise. James and Sirius were falling over themselves to catch up with them and share every nefarious act they had committed at Hogwarts since the older boys' departure. They had both grown very handsome, broad-shouldered and rough around the edges from a few adventures, but they still had their same easy tempers and wicked sense of humour. Often they brought their red-headed sister and her other equally flame-haired husband. All of these guests only stopped to chat for a few moments to James, Remus and Sirius, before vanishing into Mr. Potter's study, or else heading out into the garden to apparate. Apparently Moody had placed a charm over the Potter's house, making it not only unplottable, but impossible to place an apparition trace on. As a consequence, the living room and entrance hall began to feel very much like platform 9 3/4. In the evenings, Mrs. Potter would come home, looking worn out and determined. She would still have a smile for everyone, and be ready to host whoever was in the house for supper. She was nothing short of spectacular. The night before the boys were expected to return to Hogwarts, Moody, Frank and Alice were joining them for dinner, beef stew with dumplings. They were having a very pleasant evening. Frank and Remus were having an intense discussion about defensive charms, and Alice and the boys, including Fleamont, were arguing over which Quidditch team was going to win the league. To Remus's surprise, Moody leaned over to address Mrs. Potter and whispered, "I hear Ferox is getting out tomorrow." "Getting out?" Remus spun around, cutting Frank off mid-flow. "Getting out of where?" Moody raised an eyebrow, making his eerie magical eye bulge grotesquely. "Bloody good hearing you've got, lad. Make a good aura." Remus shook his head impatiently. "Professor Ferox?" "Yes, dear," Euphemia explained calmly. "Leo Ferox was injured at the attack on Diagon Alley. He's now stable, and we'll be able to go and stay with his grandmother for a while to recuperate fully. I'm sorry, I quite forgot he taught at Hogwarts. Did you know him well?" "Sort of. He was my favourite teacher," Remus said, his insides churning. What happened? Was he in one of the shops?" "He was on the ground, in the battle with us," Frank said. "He was in the thick of it. You couldn't fault his technique. He was firing spells better than anyone, but we all get unlucky sometimes." "But he'll be all right." Remus put down his fork now. He wasn't going to eat any more. "With proper rest," Mrs. Potter nodded, smiling sadly. All of the terror Remus had been trying to ignore for the past few days came crashing back. He gripped the seat of his chair and stared at his plate and thought about Ferox lying unconscious in the rubble. A good, strong man like that, shot down. Remus felt a stab of angry defiance in his gut, sharpening his focus. He was going to do better, no matter what it took. He was going to be quicker, braver. The next time the battle came to him, he would be ready. End of chapter 126.